When I reached a certain age, I realized that I probably wasn't, well, definitely wasn't going to grow up to be a superhero. But then came a fateful day. I was at my grandparents' house watching television, and an old movie came on called Houdini, which was about a magician named Harry Houdini who called himself an escape artist. You've seen it, right? Yeah. Well, I watched, stunned, as Houdini broke out of jail cells. He broke out of a box wrapped in chains and dropped in a freezing lake. He even broke out of something called a straitjacket, which seemed impossible, but Houdini did it anyway. I turned to my grandfather for information. He said that this guy Houdini wasn't a made-up character like Superman or Mighty Mouse. He was a real person, like me, which meant that his amazing feats were something I could actually aspire to. Well, this seemed like a turning point. I asked my sister to tie up my wrists and ankles with bandanas so I could wriggle out of them the way that Houdini had wriggled out of his straitjackets. I combined my name, Dean, with the Great Houdini to come up with my stage name, the Great Deanie. And I put on a magic show for my schoolmates at show and tell. I think everybody loved it. Well, spoiler alert, escape artist is not the path that I ended up taking in life. But the path that I did end up taking really did have a lot to do with Houdini because it led me to a place that was soon going to become very important to me, the public library. This is the first time I'd ever been to the library with a specific goal in mind. I wanted to learn more about the real Houdini. And to my amazement, the library delivered. The librarian led me to a book called Houdini, the Man Who Walked Through Walls. And for the first time, I experienced the thrill of doing research, and particularly researching one of my personal heroes. Well, after that, the floodgates opened. I started researching a whole string of heroes who I fell in love with one after the other. There was Mark Twain, the brilliant writer who had briefly lived in my hometown of St. Louis. I like to write too. There was Louis Armstrong, the world's greatest trumpet player. I played the trumpet myself, as you see on the right there. And there was Bob Gibson, the indomitable pitcher from the St. Louis Cardinals, because against all evidence, I still thought that I might grow up to be a great baseball player myself one day. And it went on and on and on. I put these people's pictures up on my wall and did everything I could to try to be like them. And so it went until I came to Madison to live after college. I had not become an escape artist as originally planned, but I had become someone who went to the library to do research for a living, a journalist. I got my dream job at a great newspaper called Isthmus, working my way up from proofreader to arts editor to editor-in-chief. I started contributing commentaries to Wisconsin Public Radio, wrote for newspapers and magazines around the country. And I started publishing children's books about all my favorite personal heroes, all those people whose pictures I'd put up on my wall. But the best thing about being in Wisconsin became clear to me almost immediately. Houdini was from here. He immigrated to Appleton, right up the road, with his family from Hungary in the 1870s. This is where he first became interested in magic and daredevil tricks. In fact, it said he had his first experience of cheating death after a plunge into the icy Fox River. Well, you can imagine what I did almost as soon as I got to Wisconsin. I made a beeline for Appleton to walk in Houdini's footsteps, breaking all speed limits. I found Houdini Plaza, which was built on the spot where Houdini had lived with his family. I toured the city's various monuments to Houdini, and I discovered the Houdini exhibit at the local museum, which showcased his locks and keys and handcuffs and other stage equipment. We even had one of his straitjackets, which seemed a lot harder to wriggle out of than those bandanas my sister had tied around my wrists and ankles. As you can imagine, it was Houdini heaven, the culmination of my lifelong love affair with the world's greatest escape artist. But in another way, it was just the start of a journey, my immersion in the wonderful world of Wisconsin heroes. As a journalist, I traveled around the state, I interviewed countless people, I read constantly about local history, and I discovered an extraordinary number of heroic figures who had either lived in Wisconsin or had a significant experience while passing through. It made me realize that Wisconsin is a notably influential place, a crossroads for people who change the world. So that brings me to my new book, Wisconsin Idols, which offers my perspective on the dozens of heroic figures that I discovered in my own backyard. And I think the cast of characters might surprise you. Among the legendary musicians who had a notable experience passing through the state are Bob Dylan, Joni Mitchell, Kurt Cobain of Nirvana, Duke Ellington, the Beatles, and Elvis Presley. Then there's the likes of Abraham Lincoln, the writers Eudora Welty and Joyce Carol Oates, the comedian Joan Cusack, playwright Lorraine Hansberry, and Jackie Robinson. These are people you don't necessarily associate with Wisconsin, but in Wisconsin Idols, I tell the little-known stories of each one's dramatic experience in the state. For example, the folk rocker Joni Mitchell was at a low point in her life when she came to Madison for a concert. She had just broken up with her boyfriend and called off the rest of her troubled tour. This was the winter of 1976, and a historic storm had just coated the city in ice. Most of us would have stayed in our hotel rooms and sunk into a depression, right? But Joni, artist that she was, felt the call of the glassy white void. She put on a black skirt and a black ermine cape, and she went to State Street in Madison and bought a pair of black men's hockey skates. And she jumped on the ice of Lake Mendota, raising her arms like a bird in flight to let the wind carry her. She was an artist on an unearthly journey, destination unknown and arrival uncertain. The mysterious experience inspired the songs on her next album called Hejira, which translates as journey. And the uncanny images from Lake Mendota proved to be perfect for the album jacket, one that Rolling Stone picked as among the best of all time. Jackie Robinson also has a little-known connection to Wisconsin via his unlikely relationship with an 8-year-old white kid from Sheboygan. Young Ronnie Rabinovitz idolized Jackie for integrating Major League Baseball in 1947, standing up to death threats and discrimination. His dad wrote a long-shot letter to Jackie asking if he might drop his son a line. And amazingly, Jackie kindly did so. When father and son went to Milwaukee's County Stadium to see a game between Jackie's Brooklyn Dodgers and the Milwaukee Braves, Ronnie called out from the stands, "Hey, Jackie, I'm Ronnie Rabinovitz. Remember me?" What Major League Baseball would answer something like that? But Jackie called back and he said, "Oh yeah, your dad wrote me a letter and I wrote you back. Stay in touch." And Ronnie did. The two began a lifelong correspondence in which Jackie shared his philosophy of racial harmony and personal integrity. And you have to wonder, why? Why would a national superstar pour all this effort into a kid from Sheboygan, particularly a white kid, at a time of extreme racial tension? This was the mid-1950s. Well, we can only guess. But my theory is that Jackie saw in Ronnie a soul that was yet to be corrupted by prejudice. Here was a chance to influence the next generation, one that might prove to be more tolerant than his own. The stories of Jackie's courage affected me in the same way when I read about him when I was a kid, and so it goes for children to this day. Jackie Robinson continues to shape the minds of impressionable youth, and in my mind, there's no one better. Now we go from a superhero to a scamp. This is young Harrison Ford, who was a student at Ripon College in the early 1960s, sleeping through his classes and flunking out. In his last quarter, Realizing that he wouldn't be able to graduate, he thought, what the heck? And he overcame his stage fright and signed up for a theater class. And he started a production of The Skin of Our Teeth in Rippon's Red Barn Theater wearing a fake mustache. And he loved it. He thought he might have finally found his vocation in life. But to be sure, he signed up to do community theater that summer in Williams Bay, Wisconsin, at a place called the Belfry Players Theater, supporting himself with carpentry work on the side. He occasionally flubbed his lines, but he felt himself maturing as an actor. And the experience gave him the confidence to head to Hollywood to try his luck there. Well, he had to support himself with carpentry for a few more years, but he finally made his breakthrough as Han Solo in the Star Wars series and Indiana Jones, irreverent characters more than a little reminiscent of the one-time Ripon College bad boy. So those are some of the legendary folks who had a notable experience passing through Wisconsin. Let me read you a short essay about one of them. This is called Elvis Presley, The Last Miracle. I'm going to attempt an Elvis impression during this, just so you're forewarned. Elvis Presley's story has religious overtones. A poor boy with divine talent rises from obscurity to become a rock and roll god. As a true believer, I've made pilgrimages to the two major Elvis shrines in the South, his modest birthplace in Tupelo, Mississippi, and Graceland, his not-so-modest mansion in Memphis. But Wisconsinites needn't go that far to worship Elvis. The state has a sacred site of its own in Madison, not as well known, but authentic nonetheless. At a busy intersection on the east side, a small stone marker bears Elvis's image. It stands on the spot where the king of rock and roll performed a miracle in the middle of the night on June 24th, 1977. Presley had just flown into Madison for a concert the next day, and he still wore his sparkly blue jumpsuit from an earlier show in Des Moines. On the way to a hotel, his limousine stopped at the fateful intersection, East Washington Avenue and Highway 51. He gazed to his right and saw two toughs beating up a teenager at a corner gas station. Elvis flung open the car door. "I can't let this happen," he said, snapping into savior mode. Over the strenuous objections of his bodyguard, he strode toward the attackers. Now, our hero was overweight and ailing in the summer of 1977, but he did have a black belt in karate and a not unwarranted faith in his power to alter the course of human affairs. One can only imagine the attackers' thoughts as a large, sparkling man advanced on them, throwing karate kicks and shouting, "I'll take you on." One can only imagine their shame when they realized Elvis Presley himself had caught them in a disgraceful act. They stopped mid-punch as the victim fled to safety. Elvis shook hands with astonished bystanders, jumped back into his limousine, and vanished into the night. Police officers and newspaper reporters showed up later to make sense of the visitation. The gas station rescue constituted the last miracle of Presley's life. He died less than 2 months later, worn out by drugs and despair. But Wisconsin still has the plaque on the corner of Madison's East Washington Avenue and Highway 51 to prove that he truly walked among us, performing wondrous feats. I've stood there more than once, staring at the patch of ground where the gas station used to be. I swear that, even as traffic whizzes by, you can feel the sparkling man's presence. Round of applause for Elvis. Okay, so those are some of the legendary folks who had a notable experience passing through Wisconsin. But the stories of actual Wisconsin residents who helped to change the world are just as dramatic and surprising. They include actors like Spencer Tracy, Chris Farley, Hattie McDaniel, Agnes Moorehead, Willem Dafoe, and Fred McMurray from right down the road in Beaver Dam. There are great musicians like Justin Vernon of Bon Iver, Liberace, the great bass player Richard Davis, Les Paul, and the Chordettes, girl group from Sheboygan. Great visual artists like Georgia O'Keeffe, Frank Lloyd Wright, the children's illustrators Laura Drodzik and Kevin Henkes, and the cartoonist Linda Berry. Great writers like Jane Hamilton, Edna Ferber, Aldo Leopold, Zona Gale, and the satirist from The Onion. And then great athletes like Eric and Beth Hayden, the speed skaters, the triathlete Gwen Jorgensen, the women of the All-American Girls Professional Baseball League, Bart Starr, and the great Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. Kareem was nice enough to provide a blurb for the cover of Wisconsin Idols, so he's currently my favorite Wisconsin Idol. But let me start with Oprah Winfrey, who grew up in a struggling Milwaukee family dealing with abuse and thoughts of suicide. But when she was 12 years old, she had what she calls to this day her best Christmas ever. And she claimed that it turned around her life. Just when it looked like that year's Christmas celebration would be called off due to the family's lack of funds, 3 nuns knocked on the apartment door with presents for the kids and a Christmas dinner. Oprah was so grateful that someone had remembered her and that she wouldn't have to be the only kid who'd have to say, "I got nothing for Christmas." She credits the experience with transforming her life and setting her on the path to her broadcasting career. She also credits it with inspiring her own philanthropy, because just like those nuns, she didn't want to be someone who forgot about kids in need. Here's a kid of a different sort. This is young Orson Welles, who was hailed as a boy genius for directing, writing, and acting in the 1941 movie masterpiece Citizen Kane, and then going on to precociously write and direct other movie masterpieces like The Magnificent Ambersons and A Touch of Evil. But Welles's first recognition as a genius actually came years earlier in Wisconsin. He was born in Kenosha and moved to Madison, where he came to the attention of a local newspaper for his apparent genius as a visual artist and a storyteller at the age of 10. This was literally a boy genius. After his 4th grade year in Madison, he attended Madison's Camp Indianola, where he naturally dominated camp meetings to the point where the counselor finally said, "You're not allowed to talk anymore." But Orson begged to put on a one-boy show of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde for the whole camp, and the counselor reluctantly agreed. The other campers watched in awe as Orson morphed from one character to another using only vocal inflections and body language. And 50 years later, aging campers were still talking about the experience, having been the first ones to see Welles's theatrical genius in action. Here's one more kid. This is 18-year-old Hank Aaron. You might know that Hank established himself as one of the greatest baseball players of all time with the Milwaukee Braves and Milwaukee Brewers, but you might not know that he got his start in professional baseball as an 18-year-old rookie phenom with the Eau Claire Bears minor league team in 1952. Now, Hank was from the segregated South, and he had very little experience with white people. Meanwhile, Eau Claire was an all-white town that had very little experience with Black people. But against all odds, in the racially fraught early 1950s, the white town and the Black ball player came to love one another. White families extended invitations to dinner and to go fishing, and Hank accepted. He became particularly close to one white family and even started a teen romance with their daughter to no great local outcry. He later said, "I was treated as fair as could be in Eau Claire. It helped to shape my dreams and mold me into the man that I was going to become." Contrast this with the racism that Hank experienced all around the country for the rest of his baseball career, particularly in the 1970s when he was approaching Babe Ruth's all-time home run record. In 1994, Hank returned to Eau Claire for the commemoration of a statue dedicated to his phenomenal Rookie of the Year season with the Eau Claire Bears in 1952, to an outpouring of local affection. He said later, "A lot of things happened to me in my 23 years in baseball, but nothing compared to that day in Eau Claire." Here's two more Eau Claire residents. This is Esther Lederer and Pauline Phillips. You might know them better as the twin sister advice columnists Ann Landers and Abigail Van Buren of Dear Abby. The two spent about a decade in Eau Claire, and their husbands worked there for an appliance company. Among other community-minded activities, they volunteered for the Red Cross, developing their listening skills and empathy, and those came in handy when they became the world's most famous advice columnists, drawing on the common touch that they developed in Eau Claire. Here's the great astronaut Jim Lovell, who was one of the Wisconsin idols I had a chance to interview for the book. He told me that he'd grown up as an only child to a single mother in 1930s Milwaukee, and that he was often left on his own to fend for himself when she was off at work. And that helped him develop the quality of self-reliance. Well, as you can imagine, that served him well during his trips into outer space, particularly 1970s Apollo 13 mission, when he radioed mission control with the famous alarm, "Houston, we've had a problem." A tank had exploded 200,000 miles from Earth, meaning that Lovell and his crewmates had to improvise one of the greatest recoveries in the annals of aviation, repurposing the lunar module as a kind of life raft, all in a day's work for this quintessential Wisconsin hero. So those are some of the Wisconsin legends who had a transformative effect on the world. And you can bet that Houdini is one of them, definitely included in the book. But I think my favorite category in Wisconsin idols is the lesser known Wisconsin heroes who helped to change the world. People you'll be meeting here for the first time, or maybe learning a little bit more about. There's Viola Smith from right down the road in Mount Calvary. She was the first female star of jazz drumming, known as the fastest girl drummer in the world. And she often played Fond du Lac when she was a kid with her sisters. They had a family band called the Smith Sisters Orchestra, and they'd often come to Eau Claire and also play all around the state. There's Pedro Guerrero, who was Frank Lloyd Wright's favorite photographer, took the most famous photographs of Wright's buildings, and also told some of the funniest stories about one of the 20th century's greatest egomaniacs. There's Joshua Glover and Caroline Quarles, two enslaved people who escaped to the free state of Wisconsin in the mid-1800s and eluded their pursuers on terrifying trips through the state's underground railroad network. There are several Wisconsin idols who died in the course of their heroic work. Laurel Clark was a free spirit who perished doing what she loved in the Space Shuttle Columbia disaster. Mildred Fish Harnack was a fearless Nazi resistance fighter. And Dickie Chappelle was a war correspondent who was forever barging into places where women weren't supposed to go. Finally, there's Meinhard Robbie, a little person from rural Farmington who became famous as the Munchkin coroner in The Wizard of Oz, the one who said that the Wicked Witch wasn't merely dead, but really most sincerely dead. Robbie refused to accept limits in his life. And among other adventures, he volunteered as a pilot during World War II for the Civil Air Patrol. He shares a star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame. And when he died in 2010, he received coverage in media all around the world, like the New York Times and the BBC, and for good reason, as you'll see in Wisconsin Idols. So those are some of the lesser known figures who helped to change the world. Let me read you one last brief essay about one of them. This is called Jeffrey Erlanger, It's You I Like, Mr. Rogers. Jeffrey Erlanger began his journey through the Madison medical system as a baby in the 1970s, requiring spinal surgery that left him without the use of his limbs. He got an electric wheelchair at age 4, and a year later, he needed another dangerous procedure. To soften the blow, his parents offered to grant him a wish, but they didn't anticipate his seemingly impossible request: to meet Pittsburgh-based Fred Rogers, the gentle host of the children's television program, Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood. Like so many kids around the country, Jeffrey liked to imagine himself a resident of Rogers' fictional neighborhood, where he'd feel loved and valued, regardless of his differences. The Erlangers left it to Jeffrey's older sister, Lisa, to write a letter. Rather than getting lost in a mountain of fan mail, her heartfelt note found its way to Rogers, who offered to meet the family for breakfast at the Pfister Hotel during a 1975 trip to Milwaukee. There, they discovered that the star's nurturing TV persona didn't switch off with the studio lights. He and Jeffrey bonded over the meal. A snapshot exists of Fred helping to cut the boys' food. Miraculously, Jeffrey survived his surgery. He stayed in touch with his special friend, and in 1981, he maneuvered his wheelchair onto the set for a segment of Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood. With no script and no rehearsal, the two merely chatted with the cameras rolling. "This is my friend Jeff Erlanger," says Rogers, sitting on a porch step in his signature cardigan sweater. "He's one of my neighbors here, and I asked him if he would come by today because I wanted you to meet him, and I wanted you to see his electric wheelchair." What follows is a moving moment in television history, one that has been celebrated in books, documentaries, and articles. We watch a respectful adult truly engaged with a charming child who happens to face significant physical challenges. Jeffrey demonstrates his wheelchair to Roger's evident delight. "Jeff, your mom and dad must be really proud of you," he says. "I know I am." Jeffrey matter-of-factly discusses his condition and his Madison doctors, concluding, "This just shows that you have a lot of things happening to you when you're handicapped." Rogers responds with encouragement. "Of course, but you're able to talk about those things so well and help other people who might have the same kinds of things." Rogers asked Jeffrey to join him in a rendition of "It's You I Like." Looking into each other's eyes, they sing the affectionate lyrics. "I hope that you'll remember, even when you're feeling blue, that it's you I like." Fred bids farewell to Jeffrey with a valuable message for young viewers. We have to all discover our own ways, don't we, of doing things when we're feeling blue. He adds, laughing, "I'm not feeling blue right now, though." "Me neither," Jeffrey answers, a beatific smile indicating that one of his dreams has just come true. In the 1990s, Erlanger graduated from Madison's Edgewood College with a degree in political science and embarked on the career Mr. Rogers envisioned for him, helping other people with disabilities. He devoted himself to public service, chairing Madison's Commission on People with Disabilities and pushing for accessible taxi service, among other innovations. His work earned him a commendation from the U.S. Senate, and the city of Madison later established the Jeffrey Clay Erlanger Civility and Public Discourse Award. Erlanger inspired people with a glass-half-full motto. "It doesn't matter what I can't do. It's what I can do. That's how I try to live my life." Rogers considered Jeffrey's appearance on Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood an all-time highlight. He often referred to it in speeches as a way of motivating people to overcome their own obstacles. Erlanger died in 2007 at just 36, and his motto continues to inspire passersby on his tombstone in Madison's Forest Hill Cemetery. If his death makes you feel a bit blue, I encourage you to watch a video of his last encounter with Fred Rogers at 1999's Academy of Television Arts and Sciences Awards. During a segment honoring Rogers, Erlanger rolled onto the stage in a tuxedo, treating his friend to an emotional surprise. Fred could barely hold back his tears as Jeffrey said, "When you tell people it's you I like, we know that you really mean it. And tonight, I want you to know that on behalf of millions of children and grown-ups, it's you that I like." Whenever I watch this euphoric clip, I can relate to Rogers' comment from that 1981 episode. "I'm not feeling blue right now." Round of applause for Jeff Erlanger and Mr. Rogers. So those are some of the stories from Wisconsin Idols. And there are many more where those came from. Harrowing ones, heartrending ones, and I hope some humorous ones. I couldn't help including myself in some of the stories, whether it's my experience of interviewing these people or reviewing their work as an arts critic, or in some cases even befriending them. As someone who's researched and revered them for my whole life, I don't tend to see their lives as separate from my own. I still want to be like them, just the way that I'd wanted to be like Houdini and Superman and Mighty Mouse. And to this day, when I need a jolt of inspiration, I occasionally put on one of my old superhero costumes. So that wraps up the presentation, but there's one last thing we have to do together. After all this talk of heroes, I think we need to say Mighty Mouse's famous words together one last time. So I'm going to count to 3, and I want everyone to say, "Here I come to save the day," one last time, as loud as you can. And remember, it's more fun and more authentic if you make the big Mighty Mouse muscles. Okay? So here we go. 1, 2, 3. Here I come to save the day. So for all these great heroes, and for the Wisconsin hero inside, all of us, one more round of applause.
I remember one time somebody said that during the Black Hawk Wars, Abraham Lincoln was in Wisconsin, and he was in Dodge County. He got his horse pretty much shot off from underneath him, so he had to take a canoe down to Rock River from Dodge County all the way down to Illinois. So I thought
that is true.
That's an interesting story.
He always made fun of himself for being such a bad soldier.
Yeah, I'd love to have a statue exactly where he was. Yeah. And have just a picture of him just kind of frustrating looking at the canoe like, holy cow, now I gotta use this.
That's a great story. Abraham Lincoln actually is in the book, but it's for a different story. I don't know if you know about the night that he spent in Janesville. Great story. He was up in Wisconsin for a speech in 1859, warming up for his first presidential campaign. And he was in Beloit giving a talk, and somebody from Janesville, you probably know about all this, saw him speak and said, "Hey, how about coming to Janesville? And you can stay overnight in my house, and because I'm sure that people there would want to hear you." And Lincoln said, "Sure, I'll do that." So he gave a speech. He stayed overnight in this gracious house. And in those days, on Saturday nights, which is what this was, the custom was that you put your boots outside the room that you were staying in, and then the servants would pick them up and shine them, clean them all up, and then put them back in front of your door the next morning. So you'd be ready to put them on and go down to breakfast. Well, Lincoln came out of his room the next morning, and the shoes weren't there. And he was too modest to go downstairs in his stocking feet and say, "Where's my shoes?" So he stayed in his room, and he missed his train back to Illinois because of his modesty and his humility. So he stayed an extra day, and he went to church with the family. He had a picnic out back and under one of these beautiful oak trees, and then finally caught his train back to Illinois. So this place still exists, and it's now called the Lincoln Tallman House, and the tree is still there under which he had his picnic, and they remember Abe Lincoln in Janesville.
It was a couple of years ago that I found out that the Heisman Trophy, whom it was named after, he's buried up in Rhinelander. Does he? Oh, yeah, he is buried up in Rhinelander. But
something every day.
Yeah, so I just wanted to.
Did he have? So he was from Wisconsin?
That I don't remember.
He must have lived here, or else.
I think it had to do with his wife.
Oh, okay.
But he is buried up in Rhinelander.
Okay, I have to remember that one for volume 2.
There you go.
Anybody else? Or I've got one actually. you've mentioned you've got to interview a number of people throughout the book, but how else did you come across the stories, or like what was that research process like? When you were making decisions and like the places that you would go to like find information on all of these people, because these are some of these are pretty intimate stories, like Fred Rogers or Hank Aaron and their friends. So.
Yeah. Well, my wife, who's standing back there, was very helpful. A lot of these people I'd known and idolized my whole life, but then it was time to fill out the book, and I thought, who else is there that I might not know about? Well, Anne helped me with research and found a bunch of people. Visiting places around Wisconsin. I love to go visit the places where my idols had lived. I took a trip to Mount Calvary. Have you guys been to Mount Calvary? I've been through there. And I was asking people on the street, have you heard of Viola Smith? Do you remember her? And I met somebody who was in front of the VFW hall, and he said, oh yeah, there's a little museum around the corner that has mementos from her life, but it's only open for like a couple of hours once a month. He's like, it's right now. So I lucked out. I went to the little museum, and I'm paging through all these wonderful scrapbooks, and I got contact information from Viola Smith's relatives who I called and interviewed. So wonderful little serendipitous things like that. Were really fun when that happened.
Yeah. And your children's book about it, I just saw it. The library here has 4 copies of that.
I wrote a children's book about Viola Smith too. It's called the Fastest Girl Drummer. The Fastest Drummer. Yes. Yeah, she's an amazing figure. She lived into her hundreds and she continued drumming. Yeah, she was just indomitable.
Huh.
I've got a couple people who were involved in warfare in the book. Hans Christian Hegg. Have you guys ever heard of him? There's a big statue of him at the Wisconsin Capitol. He fought for the North during the Civil War, and he was a great leader of soldiers. He died, I think, at Chickamauga, and gave everything, for the cause of abolition. And then I mentioned Dickie Chappelle, who was a war correspondent from the Milwaukee area, and she died during an ambush during the Vietnam War. She took some amazing photographs starting in World War II of conflicts all the way up through Vietnam. Thank you so much, everybody. This is so much fun.
Thank you, everyone.